I'm more interested in getting people to reconsider how you come at him at all, right? The big picture here. So I've written out a bit of an intro and then this story. So I would like to invite you to consider something rather important, something that I genuinely think that most people, Christian or otherwise, have not sat with long enough when it comes to matters related to Paul. I am referring to the difference in focus for Saul versus the focus or message of Paul. In keeping with my content in my Making Sense of Paul two-part video course, I do not believe that Paul ever had what we would call a conversion moment. I know, the book of Acts says that he did, and retells that event 2 more times. But the book of Acts has a purpose other than telling what actually happened, whether in terms of Paul or Jesus' disciples. Let's come at the picture this way. Consider the various dynamics that would be involved in this scenario if it were happening today. So I'm going to tell you a story, and then we're going to talk about it in relation to Paul. So consider this. There's an organization in your community that has some members speaking out about some people in the leadership abusing their power, even lining their pockets by their misuse of power. Okay, you're picturing this, imagining that. As you might expect, these members of the leadership had a range of responses to these allegations. But as a board, they find ways to minimize or ignore these accusations, to sweep them under the rug. Eventually, since this approach did not seem to work, they try meeting with the main agitator, Alan, in order to work things out. But their meetings usually end with them resisting acknowledgement of the issues. This carries on for some time, mostly not making the news for many months. Utterly fed up, Alan and some of his buddies decide to take a trip to headquarters for this organization, thinking that surely they would take their concerns seriously. On the morning of their trip, they are in a terrible car accident, a collision with another car. The driver, their ringleader, Alan, is killed. But his buddies survive, and they confer with each other about the collision. Something about it didn't seem quite right. There was something odd. Their friend had been really careful. The other driver came out of nowhere, it seemed. Needless to say, with their ringleader now dead from what they believe to be not an accident, they are shaken up, even a bit scared to speak up. But given some time, they are all the more determined to speak up about the concerns. I mean, didn't the fact that they were, targeted on their way to speak up mean that they were onto something? Unfortunately, as tends to happen with people in power, instead of giving in and taking seriously these outcries, the members of the leadership doubled down. In fact, Joe, one of their good friends, someone not actually on the board, but who hung out with them at parties and weekend gatherings, took it upon himself to try to neutralize things. Again, unfortunately, as time passes, people are still upset, speaking out. The members of the board become more desperate to silence the accusations. Some of the agitators end up being arrested on what they thought were bogus charges. But since the charges are unrelated to the things they were saying about the organization, there is no way to get the members of the leadership to comment on it publicly. I mean, there must be favors being called in behind closed doors. Nearly a year passes, and things are still somewhat at a deadlock. Deadlock? Is that the word I meant? Anyway, doesn't matter. You get what I mean. A few members are still in jail. Some report being kidnapped in the middle of the night, taken to some warehouse to be questioned and tortured and released in the morning, though no one in the community seems to believe them. But nothing has shifted within the local leadership or in their business dealings that have been brought into question. Somewhere along the way, Joe shows up at one of the networking meetings where the members agitating for more just practices gather to stay connected and filled in on what is happening. His appearance there is pretty upsetting to everyone in the room, as you can imagine. What are you doing here? You're not even trying to hide the fact anymore that you're trying to undermine us. You're just going to come right at us. But when they all quiet down and give him some space to speak, what he says is, quite frankly, shocking and confusing. I've thought long and hard about your friend Alan, he says, and I think there's something important for all of us to learn from his death. I mean, none of us want his death to be in vain, right? We really need to ensure everyone's safety on the roads. So I say we start a campaign in his name to get more legislation created for more vehicle and road safety. I even have a few slogans and the framework for a media campaign outlined. What do you say? Will you hear me out? What could they say? I mean, this was the first time anyone associated with the organization had even acknowledged Alan's death in such an honest and vulnerable way. Of course they cared about Alan's death not being in vain, and maybe that was a tricky intersection. I don't know. But was this the way to make a difference? How was this going to help them address their concerns? Time passes. The slogans for road safety that Joe came up with become common parlance, and a few bills even make it into legislation. Alan, now dead, becomes known as a courageous young man, a man of moral convictions who was needlessly taken from us too young. Alan becomes something of a hero, someone who cares about your safety on the roads. Some people even have drive like Alan drove bracelets and lanyards made, worn on the wrists of teenagers just learning to drive, hanging from rearview mirrors in cars driven by people of all ages. Alan's death was not in vain. The issue that got Alan killed? People stopped paying attention. Joe managed to distract people enough with road safety that no one wanted to hear about abuse of power in the leadership of some organization. Road safety was easy to talk about. Everyone wanted to be safe. Talking about people abusing power, it's just not very easy to organize around, now is it?